Hello, everyone. We are in for such a treat today. I was recently in the Eastern States at Food Frontier's annual conference, and I met the most wonderful woman that I'm going to introduce you to now, Sonalie Figueiras. Hello, Sonalie, you're founder and editor in chief of the remarkable media platform Green Queen. It's a platform for advocating social and environmental change and for inspiring and empowering content in what I think you would say is one of the world's leading outlets for alternative protein. Sonalie, you're also the founder and CEO of Eco Warehouse. It's the global sourcing platform for certified organic products. And also the CEO and co-founder of Source Green, the world's first climate tech platform to help brands quit plastic. So, Sonalie, with over a decade of experience in publishing, digital marketing, organic trade, sustainability, and alt proteins, and green packaging, you are a climate legend already and a veteran in this space. You've got a great eye for market trends, and you are also sought after as international keynote speaker, and your expertise has been heard at the Harvard Business School and a couple of TEDx's as well, and a whole list of other things.
Hi, it's so great to be here. That's a very kind introduction. Basically, what I'm working on is really trying to help people around me, businesses, consumers, readers, understand, the big link between food systems and climate and between plastic and climate. Those are the two really big poles that I operate on. You could call me Chief Green Queen there. I'm the editor-in-chief, so I really kind of work around our coverage and our coverage direction. And then I have an incredible team that executes that. But essentially, 1/4 to 1/3 of all global greenhouse gas emissions come from our food systems. And we just do not talk about it enough. What we try to do at Green Queen is also shine a light on heroes such as yourself, everybody that is working to try and usher in this food system change, be it politicians, ecosystem makers, NGOs, but also startups who are trying to showcase solutions. And it's not always an easy road. The last 6 to 12 months have been a tough moment for the industry that I play in, one of them being the alternative protein industry, basically the future foods, the food tech industry, where there's a huge kind of come to Jesus moment where people are wondering, is this working? Investors are kind of abandoning the space. The returns haven't been there from a business point of view. We're realizing that a lot of the solutions that we want to usher in require a lot more than a 10-year time horizon, which is what venture capital funds have. We're not getting the government support that we would love to have compared to electric vehicles and the energy transition. And so it's just becoming very apparent that changing our food system, despite how much we need to do it, is incredibly difficult, and the challenges are so many more than we originally thought.
I'd like to just explore one of the points you just raised, because I'm very aware, I heard this at the Food Frontier conference, and you've just also seconded that, that if you put together all of the interventions, the government funding, the subsidies, the regulatory regime changes that have gone into electric vehicles, solar panels, even containers for change, the waste management stuff. If you put all of the money that's been spent by governments worldwide into a bucket, it would still not be as an effective measure to fight climate crisis as the world's population just doing without meat for one meal a day.
There are quite a few numbers around that. It's really difficult because on one hand, those of us in the space are aware that meat consumption reduction is really just such an incredible way to really get to our net zero goals. It's just a powerful step. But how do we get to that meat consumption reduction? Many people don't agree, and those of us who do agree are just painfully aware just how difficult it is to make that happen. And we have political systems, especially in the democratic global north, that are set up so that leadership changes every few years. And for a lot of what we need to happen, it has to be longer term. And that's what we really have to figure out, I think, that we're not doing well, is how do we make climate and solving climate broad and bipartisan in its nature?
So I think one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you was what happened at COP29. You were a speaker at COP28. Food was starting to emerge. In fact, I felt quite hopeful after COP28. It was on the agenda, and there was clear push to try and come up with some strategies around tackling climate crisis through the way we consume food. This one seems to have been very different, and I've had a look at your 4-part series that has been published on COP29. Firstly, congratulations on the writers who put it together. The 9 was meant to be the financial commitment COP. Yeah, they were looking for money on the table, money to push towards developing countries who are going to be impacted most directly and immediately by the climate shift. However, the background of that was fairly disappointing, to say the least, from my perspective, and I think from yours. Do you think governments truly understand or are committed to transforming the food system as it relates to climate action?
I think that we haven't really reached broad awareness of that message across governments across the world. And I think that we're also dealing with a world where a lot of countries are still grappling with basic issues like electrification and development. And in those countries, changing from beef to plant-based meat when their populations are not even really eating huge amounts of beef just does not feel like a priority. So you could kind of draw an analogy between kind of the work that richer countries need to do to give financing to the poorer countries to cover their toll on emissions for the last 100 years. And that's very similar to what richer populations need to do around meat consumption, which is they need to lessen their meat consumption so that developing countries are allowed to have more of a shot at some animal meat consumption as they develop. And it's sort of the issue with the political sphere is, as I said, in a lot of democratic countries, you have turnover all the time. And so it's very difficult to keep up an agenda for a long time. And if you look at a country like China, where they have a more centralized form of government, they've been able to make huge progress against the climate crisis and towards a net zero future, because every few years it doesn't just change the other way. And a lot of these issues need long-term planning, right? And so that's why they're doing so well with things like solar energy and wind energy and electric vehicles. And I do believe that China will play a major role in food system transformation with technologies like cultivated meat and things like protein fermentation. I think the country will be one of the big actors because they have no choice, because they have this growing, enriching population that needs more protein, and there's just not enough available land, water, resources to match that level of beef production that the demand is going to require. So, I think this is the big difference between short-term politics and long-term politics. And then if we talk about COP, it's interesting because, I think given the lackluster result, some people may be ready to give up on COP. And as activists, we want so much more than these big convenings can deliver. And, even today, I'm grappling with the results of the global plastic treaty talks that have collapsed without a deal. This was supposed to be the big deal one. They're all in Busan in South Korea. It has not worked. So what does that mean, that we're not able to reach consensus amongst 200 countries on how to deal with plastic waste and pollution, and how to deal with, fighting the climate crisis in a world where it is getting harder and more expensive to grow food. And I think you could give up. But even though these gatherings don't bring us where activists want them to go, we cannot get rid of them, because the act of all these countries just getting in a room and talking is something that we must uphold, even in moments where it feels like we are not getting anywhere. What I think was really disappointing this COP is less actually the non-result and more the fact that so many powerful countries did not show up.
We're part of the Asia Pacific region, of course, and the Asia Pacific region has perhaps a little bit more diversity in its political systems than you might be used to around North America. So this is why we have, guided democracies in Singapore, which make 30-year plans for the future, and they actually can see that in 2050 they're not going to be able to feed the population. So hell, what are we going to do? Oh, let's look at the cellular agriculture stuff. That's really cool. How do we use that? How do we jump on that and be a food producing nation instead of a food importing nation? And there's other places, India, for different reasons, with the biggest democracy in the world. And so the big countries like India and China and some of the smaller APAC region, I think there are real opportunities for us, being the Australian government, to actually do more in maximising our capacity to fill an export role to those countries, whether we're talking about technology, innovation, venture capital, whatever it is. It's almost impossible in Australia to have a conversation that makes sense about food security, by the way, because, hello, we're a bloody enormous nation and we don't have that many people living here, and food is not a problem for us. I should give a corollary to that, is that we have huge problems with some of our rural and remote Indigenous communities who cannot get fresh food. So their supplies are very restricted and probably not to the most healthy food lines. So to start that conversation in Australia is about an economic argument for many of us. And Sonalie, we're in the process of having a federal government that is banning the live export of sheep. Hallelujah. And so our farmers, particularly in my half of the country, the western half of the country, they make a lot of money out of live sheep export. And so they're looking for transition arrangements for their future. How do they make money in agriculture into the future in a sustainable a culturally appropriate way into the future? So I'm really trying to push the fact that, hey, you guys, we've got all of these alternative technologies coming to the fore at the moment. So you're talking about looking to China. I totally get that. And I think we should be looking at India and APAC to form better links to actually get this technology out in those regions. We've talked about some of the darkness in the tunnel. Where are the lights, Sonalie, that we should be promoting that illuminate this tunnel of darkness that we're stuck in at the moment?
I think it's incredibly important to make sure that Asia Pacific is at the table. The Asia Pacific region has taken a very different approach around protein transition, and you could argue that it's potentially the more kind of stable, consistent, long-term, successful approach. Which is that it is very aligned with food security. Yeah. And I think that it's really important to understand that food security means different things to different people. Yes. And one of the most fascinating things about meeting you in Melbourne and going to Food Frontier was hearing, someone very senior in a major food company explain that it's very difficult to explain to the average Australian consumer or chef that there's a beef problem when you have so much grass land that is ideal for grass-fed beef, and that grass-fed beef is available, it's consistent, it's not particularly expensive. And whereas an Asian consumer who never looks at cows on a field and did not grow up with what I like to call the happy cow myth, is not going to have the same experience around what beef represents to them in their diet. What is really, really apparent is the need to localize solutions. And what that really comes down to is what I mentioned earlier, which is we need more empathy for consumers, for government officials, and for cultural differences. We really need to understand people better. And I think what a lot of the latest elections are showing is that the mainstream media and a lot of us don't seem to understand the average person very well, and don't seem to have a real kind of grasp on the difficulties that they're dealing with. I think that people are inherently trying to figure out what's best for their families. So there's a bit of inherently good, there's a bit of inherently selfish. That's part of who we are. Why is there such a tension between what we need to do to survive and help our families thrive and what's bad for the climate crisis? There's this massive tension.
I think this brings us into a part of the conversation that I really, really wanted to explore with you a bit about the role of women and gender in food security into the future. But I wanted to start off by saying a little plug for Sharon Satoni. Yeah, so she has started, along with other women from around the world, a group called G100, which I am so fortunate to be one of the enabling first members of for Australia. And our chapter of G100 is called Food Systems Innovation and Resilience. So our work is in as a group of women, 100 global women, looking at how we influence government and organizations towards better food choices and a more gender equal future. And so the role of women in this debate, I wanted to ask you first of all about the work you're doing with Food for Climate League.
Yes, so I want to be very clear. I'm on the advisory board, and I'm very proud to be on the advisory board, but I am not the main work is being done by the incredible team led by Eve Thoreau-Paul, the founder. And essentially it's a woman-led nonprofit working to make climate smart eating the norm. And so what they do is they create toolkits and campaigns and programs. But what's really interesting is that their work is really founded in behavioral science research. So going back to what I just talked about, empathy, understanding people's behavior. There's a lot of cultural sociology and anthropology that is being used to figure out how do we help people make climate smart eating choices. And they work with corporates, they work with other nonprofits, they work with institutions, foundations, they do research projects, they do trials, and they try to show through using behavioral research that you can actually do things like make the climate choice the default choice. And renaming items on menus can help people make different food choices. And the way you place things in a food spread can actually make a difference, right? So they're trying to help create enabling really tools for other organizations to then be able to roll out and have great impact. And what I love about what they do, and it's really important, it's something I've been talking about for a really long time now, is the power of protein transition in the food service. I think we spend too much time focused on the protein transition at the retail level and at the consumer level. But for me, where there's incredible impact and positive movement and positive behavioral change is in things like food service. So cafeterias, whether they be in schools, prisons, government offices, corporates, school, hospitals. There's just a lot of ways there that we can move the dial and affect hundreds of thousands of people at a time.
I put out a report a few months ago called Transforming the Food System, and basically a set of lessons for government about what we could be doing. And the central message, or one of the 5 central messages, is we're the biggest purchaser of so many items, food being one of them, with our prison system, with our health system, with our education system. And as a major purchaser of goods and services, governments are in an absolutely perfect position to do some amazing work in this sector.
The other win beneath those sails is really this legislation around Scope 3 emissions that's finally come to fruit in Europe, and hopefully will be adopted in other countries too. California has a version of it, though not the rest of the US. And basically what it makes abundantly clear is that food companies and food service companies have to very much look at their scope 3 emissions, which means veering towards lower carbon foods in the future if they are going to reach their net zero emissions goals without doing things like just buying carbon credits. Companies were happy to share scope 1 and 2, but there was nothing around scope 3. Now that we have data around scope 3, it's going to create a knock-on effect of companies looking at, all right, we need to make it so that our consumers or our brands or our chefs are choosing lower carbon foods, because that has an impact on our bottom line.
I really wanted to pursue with you on your own work in publishing, Sonalie, and I know that you publish cookbooks, and so I wanted to find out from you, what part do you think again your publishing of cookbooks has in helping define a new future for food?
One of the earlier things you wanted to talk about was about the power of women in changing food systems. And if there's one thing that really makes me sad, is that women do not have enough control over the big food choices, in the sense that there are not enough women leading the way at big food companies, in food policy jobs, in big food buyer jobs. And that is just crazy to me, because something like 85% of grocery bill decisions are made by a woman. Women tend to be by far, across all countries, the deciders of what their household eats. So women are the cooks, they are the meal planners, they are the nutritionists of their households. And yet they have such a small role in deciding what is on those shelves, what is grown, how it's grown in the fields. And that's a huge issue. And cooking, to me, is a very difficult subject, because on one hand, it's this incredible gift that womankind has given to humanity. On the other hand, it's also this incredible chore that womankind has been ascribed with. But when cooking is something you have to do, it is so much harder to bring joy and, gratitude to the task. And so I think we're in such a quandary, because on one hand, one of the biggest things you can say to people is, oh, cook more at home. That's like a way to be more sustainable. But by doing that, you are increasing a woman's second shift. You are increasing her homework, just her extra work, when she likely has a career and other things that she's already juggling. So I really struggle with that. And I think that we need to be instead thinking about solutions where we provide urban families with more home-cooked food, but it's not all down to the mother or the woman to be responsible for executing that. And so they're kind of worlds of happiness and joy, because food and cooking to me is joy. But for other people, they might represent drudgery and, shackles. And so I want to hold space for those ideas, and those feelings. Yeah. And again, what does it always come down to is empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
My last question, and this is a bit tongue in cheek. If I could grant you a superpower, what would it be?
There's a part of me that's like a little girl that's like, I would love to be able to fly. But what I really think I would like to do with my superpower is actually give others like an automatic empathy. I really do believe that we would be in a different world. That doesn't mean that I don't think that there's space to disagree with people and have different kind of agendas and different interests and different preferences, but we really just have lost this ability to empathize, and we do not train it anymore. And because we've become, a neoliberal, like growth, profit, power, status part, a society, global society, we've completely lost the ability to celebrate empathy. We see it as a weakness. We often relegate it to like the feminine sphere. And we tend to kind of look at the lens of human evolution only by picking only the traits that apply to neoliberalism, which is that we're competitive and we're status driven and we are, power hungry. And it's so funny because we're also other things. And why do we only kind of focus on one half of those of our traits in our society and what we revere? And we've forgotten the other half. And that's why I think our society is so unbalanced.
Thank you so much for your time and for having a chat with me. I really deeply appreciate it. And I wish you so much joy and happiness over the holiday season.
I will, and I love the holiday season. It always recharges me. I always find I love this opportunity to be festive and joyful and thoughtful
Beautiful.
around this time of the year.
Thank you again.